From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Right away here today, an update for you on the Cattle Trace pilot project here in Kansas. K-State's Cassie Kniebel and the chair of the board of Cattle Trace, Depenbush, will talk about its implementation now underway. Also, K-State's Gregg Hanzlicek talks with Sarah Moyer about several major cattle health and well-being issues that have turned up with cow-calf herds being managed in confinement and what you producers need to do to alleviate those problems. K-State's Sandy Johnson will offer advice on feed supplementation to the cow herd to counter the stress brought on by the recent wet and now colder weather. And K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas. All that here on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. We thought it opportune to bring you up to the moment on a project which was announced this past summer of immense importance to the cattle industry here in the state of Kansas and potentially beyond. It's called Cattle Trace. Kansas State does have a hand in this among many partners, and the intent here is to establish a traceability program that will help the cattle industry address potential disease outbreak issues that might come along in the future. We brought by once again the program manager for Cattle Trace. She is Cassie Kniebel, based here at Kansas State. Also, the chairman of the board of directors for Cattle Trace Incorporated, Depenbush, with Innovative Livestock Services. And we want to ask them to share the latest on this program. Cassie, first of all, welcome back, and please reiterate for us what Cattle Trace is all about.
Yes, thanks for having me. Cattle Trace is the pilot project for animal disease traceability. It's a collaboration with the Kansas State University Beef Cattle Institute, which is who I work for, the Kansas Department of Agriculture, and Kansas Livestock Association, and then private industry. So Innovative Livestock Services has been greatly involved for the past 6 to 9 months. Is that right, Brandon? Yep. So we've spent the past 6 months focusing our efforts on participant recruitment and really looking at placement of readers and evaluating what technologies to use. So we're using ultra-high frequency technology for this pilot project. Again, kind of helps with our goal of being a hands-free system and minimal data points. So cattle can move through large groups at a time, and we collect the time and date stamp, the animal ID, and the location of those readers and when those cattle move through those readers.
It really is as basic as that. It doesn't get much deeper than that, with the purpose here of literally tracking cattle and their movements throughout the system.
Correct. Yes, so we have 3 main objectives, and I would say we're on track with those so far. Our first one is to build a purpose-built infrastructure for an animal disease traceability system. Again, that's placement of readers and really participant recruitment. The second objective is to evaluate that system. So do some mock traceback exercises. Those will start this winter and kind of continue through the next 18 months of the pilot. So it should end spring of 2020 is kind of our goal. And then the final objective is to look at the costs and benefits of that system and evaluate the value across the industry, but also at the individual producer segments.
Well, Brandon, not only are you the chairman of the board overseeing Cattle Trace, but you are representing the business part of the industry within this, and talk about your perspective on it from that vantage point.
Okay. First of all, good morning, Eric, and thanks for having us. Really appreciate your interest in the topic. And, from our company standpoint, it is a tool that we view as a risk management tool for the industry. It's important for all segments of the industry to be able to have a tool such as Cattle Trace to be able to trace back animals just in the case of a disease outbreak. So the information that we hold, we are very, very, very sensitive to that it's going to be held confidential and only be accessed in a disease outbreak. I am here, I guess, representing the board of directors, and I think we have a tall task ahead of us to define how we get access to that data, when we get access to that data. And I think that is, for all the producers out there listening, I mean, data sensitivity, confidentiality is of the utmost importance to us. So I think that's a tall task ahead of us to make sure we define that so that everybody is comfortable with the process.
Now, the system, the intent, has been to instill it at every point along the production chain, from the cow-calf producer, the ranch level, to the auction barn, to the feedlot, to the packer. Talk, if you would, both of you, about the response to this initiative. It's been pretty impressive, hasn't it, from the get-go?
Yes, so we're kind of wrapping up the first part of our recruitment efforts. So we've kind of finalized the first wave of participants, I guess you would say. So we have the 3 major packers in Kansas on board. We have 14 feed yards, which includes 1 backgrounding yard, and 7 auction markets across the state of Kansas. So we've shifted our efforts to cow-calf producers, specifically in those areas surrounding the participating auction markets. The list of those is on cattletrace.org if you're interested. We're scheduling producer meetings across the state to talk to people about the project and just disease traceability in general and kind of what that process looks like today, and welcome any questions and feedback from producers because as we've said, this is an industry-driven project, and the only way we're going to get it to work is to have feedback from people in the industry.
So your emphasis right now is recruiting the cow-calf producer sector, but along the rest of the chain, that's a pretty good representation that you've already brought into the loop, isn't it, Brandon?
I think so. I couldn't be more happy and more proud of all of our partners that have stepped up and with the shared vision that we have to have their seat at the table to define what a disease traceability structure looks like. I think it's a great opportunity for all of us, each segment of industry, to have a seat at the table and define what that disease traceability structure looks like. Instead of the alternative would be is we're reactionary and we have to respond to a disease outbreak. And that would be absolutely devastating because then we're left with maybe politicians or somebody forcing something down on us that may or may not suit every segment in the industry. So we're super proud of all of our partners and very thankful for all the support that we've been given. And the surprising thing is it's just really unbelievable that we just not getting much resistance. Just everywhere you turn, we're just getting a lot of positive feedback. And not only in the state of Kansas, you cross the border in other states, we're getting a lot of support there. So it's extremely fun to see.
What is the status now? Is all the technology, Cassie, in place at the participant level?
So we are a little over halfway through that process, I would say. So we have half the auction market readers installed and over half of the feed yard readers installed. So we are moving quickly, and the goal, and I think we'll meet that goal, is to have everything installed by the end of October. So we have 3 weeks left.
And then the switch flips then?
Yes. So we've read our first animals, and they're officially in our database a few weeks ago. And so excited about that. There's a little over 500 animals now in the system. And really kind of the next piece of that, now that readers are being installed, is to get tags out to producers. So I think as of today, we've distributed just over 16,000 tags. So they're moving out the door at a good pace. Again, our goal is to tag 55,000 head in the state of Kansas over the next over the 2-year pilot project. So we don't expect to tag all of those this fall. We'll tag a good majority of them over the next 6 to 9 months probably, and then hope to see those animals all the way through the packer segment by the end of the 2-year pilot.
We're looking forward to following this story as it continues to unfurl as the 2-year pilot project moves forward. One last thing, as you consider it today, the both of you, how will success be defined as you go along here? What are the metrics, if you will, that will be used?
Well, I have a 10-page document that outlines all my metrics. But it's really kind of those last two objectives. That second one is to do some mock tracebacks and evaluate that system. So there are protocols in place that the state of Kansas has to evaluate what they have today for disease traceability and look at, how timely is their process to do a traceback and to find those animals that may be impacted. And so we'll use a similar process when we evaluate our system and look at the same thing. So how long does it take to do a trace? Compare that to how long it takes to do a trace today with the current information that, the state of Kansas has and the USDA. Also, does it impact the speed of commerce? We have different metrics in place to kind of look at that, but that will also be part of our evaluation.
I would just like to add, Eric, I think when we talk about a disease outbreak, speed is of the utmost importance. Speed saves us money if we can minimize the collateral damage or the number of animals that we have to quarantine, if you will. As a point of reference, I think it took roughly 6, maybe 8 months to do a tuberculosis traceback in South Dakota, Nebraska. 6 months is a long time. I think that's half a year if my calendar's right. So, for a very contagious disease such as foot and mouth disease, that would be beyond devastating to our industry. So, Cassie, I couldn't agree with Cassie more. The speed of which we can simulate these mock tracebacks is really the number one goal of how we evaluate success.
Well, the project is out of the gate successfully, it would appear, as we get into the early stages of it. And Cassie, finally, if one would like to know more about the program and how they might be part of it, there is a website, right?
Yes. So our website is cattletrace.org. And actually, we now have a monthly newsletter, so you can sign up for that newsletter on our website and kind of stay up to date on the project as we move forward.
Cattletrace.org. Looking forward to seeing the fruits of this project as it rolls forward, and thanks to the both of you for coming over and sharing the latest on it today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On Cattle Trace, which is a pilot program that K-State is deeply involved with, among many others. Cassie Kniebel is the program manager for Cattle Trace, and Brandon Depenbush from Innovative Livestock Services serves as the chairman of the board of directors of Cattle Trace Incorporated. And we'll be back with more on This Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. Some cow-calf producers in Kansas are looking at confinement operations for their facilities, and here to heed some warning and some advice, we have K-State veterinarian Gregg Hanzlicek with the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab. Good to have you on, Gregg.
Good to be here.
First of all, let's go ahead and talk about some of the different requirements that have set this up for a discussion topic of ours today. You'll be citing some different scenarios that you've come across during the past about year and a half as this outreach has been a part of your mission, a part of some of your tasks. So, Gregg, would you go in just here first with some of the major differences that are quite stark?
Yeah, part of my duties in the diagnostic lab are to actually head up what we call the Field Disease Investigation Unit. And it's just a group of us that help producers and veterinarians if there's major health issues on their operation, they may need fresh eyes or different opinions. We're seeing over the last year and a half as some producers move more to a confinement type cow-calf operation that there are some major health repercussions that can occur if we're not exactly managing them the way that they should.
Taking, for instance, just the thought of many of the cow-calf operations as we know them today, they being more pasture-based. This, looking at confinement, the type of facilities that people are familiar with would be ones for either cows or calves. So what type of considerations have been changed as you're looking towards having a confined cow-calf operation?
Yeah, so you're right. So instead of calving and running cows and calves on grass, now we're talking about operations that may put them in a completely enclosed dry lot. With or without a building, some of the operations are letting the animals have access to small areas of pasture, but then feeding them in a dry lot situation with bunks, and that's where their water source and those kind of things. So confinement has a lot of different terms. It just means we've got animals in a smaller space than what we're used to as far as a cow-calf operation.
The couple that you mentioned, those factors such as feeding and watering, the bunk space, bunk height, and water availability, what changes would need to be made there, and what type of situations have you seen as far as what not to do or lessons learned?
Yeah, I mean, it's as simple as that. Simple, but maybe not easy, is that a lot of our bunks are made for cows or older calves. Height is around 20 to 24 inches. We've got younger calves now that are starting to eat feed. If that bunk height is more than about 18 inches, they're not going to have access to that diet the way that they should have. So we either need to do something about the bunk height, or what some producers, what we recommend is that they actually put creep feeders in the area so that those calves have some type of dry diet consistency also. Early on, and people know that calves are going to nurse all they can. They're going to drink as much milk. But we got to remember milk is 86% water. And one of the things that we forget about is that the cows need a lot of water, and we're talking 15 to 20 gallons a day if the temperature gets up much above 80 degrees. But those calves also need another form of water or liquid. And again, it's just like bunks. A lot of our waterers are made for older animals. The height, well, calves can't drink from those 24 to 30-inch waters that are off the ground. So we've got to find a way to let them have water also.
What other considerations have you discussed with producers that are switching over to this confinement type of facility?
Well, one of the biggest things is, especially if there's a building involved, and we're talking as we get in certain times of the year, especially the spring and the summer, is ventilation. This is more like managing a modern dairy than it is anything else. We need 4 complete air exchanges in a building per hour in the wintertime, and we need at least 60 in the summertime in order to keep the air clean for those animals. And one of the issues that we saw, we had respiratory issues in cows and baby calves at the same time, which is pretty strange. But this facility had very, very little airflow, meaning the organisms that cause bovine respiratory disease were building up, and it was negatively affecting both the adults and the calves. So we want things like 12-foot high sidewalls. We want the building oriented east to west direction so that the south wind blows through. It keeps that air clean. There's a whole myriad of things that we know that we need in order to keep respiratory health at its maximum when we're talking about confined animals. Again, the building design, it comes down to a couple things. One is ventilation. If we're going to try to use natural ventilation, we can't have buildings that are too close to each other because that's called what we call wind shade. We need the open sidewalls, east and west orientation. If we have those issues on a facility, there are ways around that, meaning we're going to have to use some type of mechanical ventilation in order to make sure that those animals are well. But my point is natural ventilation doesn't always work, and sometimes we have to use a secondary mechanical ventilation in order to take care of these animals.
And so it sounds like you would be a good person to get some advice from others as well, but some different scenarios that you've encountered, again, as you've been working on these field cases. Do you want to talk about injured calves and how that's been something that has come across to your way as people have moved this direction?
Absolutely. One of the first investigations we dealt with was a complaint about neonatal, very young calves that had broken legs. Some of them had bruised or broken ribs. And what we discovered is that we were calving cows in a very, very tight dry lot situations, actually several dry lot situations. And what was happening was the density of the animals were so high that the adult cows were stepping on the calves. There wasn't enough room for them to spread out and stay out of the way of the calves. And so one of the first things we did, we just basically doubled the size of the pen, which they could do, and the problem went away. So there are specific square feet requirements for cows, especially cows that are calving baby calves. And if we try to get them too tight, that's the kind of things we're going to deal with.
Another situation that you have dealt with or looked at during the field cases would be neonatal diarrhea, another one with really young calves, and what type of situation set that up?
Yeah, and that's really common in cow-calf operators. They know the disease they fear the most is scours, and rightly so. But these operations, what was happening were they were allowing the cows and the calves to go out into small grassy areas, but they were feeding the cows in a dry lot situation in a bunk. And when they'd feed twice a day, those cows would come up. Those calves would stay in that dry lot situation, and in time, the amount of adult manure and older calf manure also build up in that pen, in that dry lot. And so those baby calves, when they'd come in and lay down while their mothers were eating, they were exposed to huge loads of scour pathogens. And all of a sudden we had a scour outbreak. And it was because we weren't doing a good job of managing the accumulation of adult manure in that dry lot feeding system.
And so while talking about many of these issues that have come up and having the perspective that it isn't the same type of situation as having cows or calves separately in a confinement lot or in a dry lot, or even, like you were mentioning, one where they have a grass area, but there's still that place where a bunk line is present. So what are some of the advantages that people are looking at if producers are unaware of why some of their fellow producers or neighbors are considering this situation? How do you see that playing out as something positive?
Well, that's a great question. And one of the reasons why people, at least some that we worked with that have gone to more of a confinement rearing facility, is because of the drought. There wasn't any grass. So they brought those animals in and started feeding them in a dry lot situation. They had harvested forages. There just wasn't any pasture. So that's one reason why people started doing it. The other reason is some people are looking at their land and saying, I may be able to utilize my land instead of grazing it for my cow-calf operation. I may be able to utilize it in other ways. Let's bring these cows in and calves, and let's use a confinement program for that part. So there's two major reasons why it seems like it's growing every year.
And so in summary, what are some major warnings? We've talked about quite a few different aspects. What's your biggest piece of advice that if producers are going to consider this, that they need to definitely pay a lot of attention to?
I would, number one, start with the local veterinarian and just say, here's what we're doing. And if the veterinarian, which a lot of them will, have the background on what exactly is needed for space, for water, for bunk space, for shade, for ventilation, all those things need to be taken in consideration, and let the local veterinarian or somebody that understands that come and look at the operation and say, these are some things that I think are bottlenecks that we may need to change. These are some things that we can do, and just basically have a good plan, a good assessment of the facility before you go to all the work and all the time to try to do that on your operation.
Don't want any producers in tough situations, but as you've seen and talked about here today, Gregg, that some have happened in the past and good to be learning from for other producers making these considerations. Well, it's good to have you on once again, Gregg. You are a regular here on the program, and appreciate you coming in today.
My pleasure.
Once again, that was K-State veterinarian with the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, Gregg Hanzlicek. He was discussing issues that have come up during their field cases dealing with confinement cow-calf operations. Some warnings to pay attention to and consider if producers are switching over to that type of system. Also, some maybe advantages if forages are still a struggle for some producers here heading into the winter. I'm Sarah Moyer, and we'll have more here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Now on to today's agricultural news headlines. And because of the Columbus Day holiday on Monday, the U.S. Department of Agriculture delayed its release of the weekly crop progress report until yesterday, and we have those numbers for you today. Here in the state of Kansas, for the week ending this past Sunday, our topsoil moisture supplies are now at 16% surplus and 69% adequate, 15% short to very short, and subsoil moisture 8% surplus and 75% adequate, 17% short to very short. Winter wheat planting in the state now 58% complete. That's ahead of the 49% for the 5-year average on the date, and emergence at 33%. That's ahead of the 25% average. Corn harvest in Kansas now 59% in. That's ahead of the 52% average. Soybean harvest at 14%. That's behind the 19% average. And the grain sorghum harvest is at 16% complete now. That's very near the average for this date. For the national view, then, on corn and soybean harvest progress, we turn to the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey has good news and bad news when it comes to corn.
We've had our killing freeze across parts of the upper Midwest, but the good news is that the corn crop nearly all mature when those freezes hit in late September and early October.
93% of the corn is mature nationwide.
Now, the corn harvest has slowed to nearly a standstill in some of the wettest areas, and overall, we've just gotten past the one-third mark to reach 34% by the 7th of October. That is still ahead of the 5-year average of 26% and significantly ahead of last year's 21%.
Farmers in Iowa, North Dakota, and Wisconsin harvested less than 5% this week, while Pennsylvania fell behind its average.
And in some of those really wet areas, it's going to be a while before producers are able to get back into the field.
Corn condition is steady, 68% good to excellent and 12% very poor to poor. Soybean crop progress is ahead of the average.
Nearly all of the soybeans dropping leaves, 91% nationally, 85% is the 5-year average. Last year we were at 88%.
Rippey says this means the crop was not as affected by recent frosts in the upper Midwest as it could have been.
The soybean harvest also now very sluggish in many areas. Just 9% of the crop harvested during the week ending October 7th. The overall number, 32%, which means we have now fallen behind the 5-year average of 36%.
Meanwhile, he says soy condition ratings are steady.
At 68% good to excellent, 10% very poor to poor, so no impact yet of the wet weather. Those numbers are favorable compared to last year.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
True fall weather has definitely checked in here in Kansas, and in many cases an abrupt shift from warm, dry conditions to the wet and now the crisp, if not outright cold, temperatures. The dampness and the chill will put stress on cattle. And K-State Research and Extension livestock specialist for Northwest Kansas, Sandy Johnson, offers these thoughts on supplemental feeding to help the herd compensate for the conditions.
Given this cool, wet weather, we may need to consider additional management steps for the most vulnerable groups of cattle. While cattle are somewhat helped by the fact they're starting to grow their winter coats, many have been wet for consecutive days with little time to dry out, and animals have not had time to adapt to the colder weather. When the coat becomes wet, cold stress occurs at the relatively high temperature of 60 degrees Fahrenheit. As the temperature goes down, cattle need about 1% more energy in their diet for each degree below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. If the amount of insulation or body condition is low, then cold stress begins at an even warmer temperature. With wind and temperatures in the 30s and 40s, energy demands can easily increase 20 to 30% or more. Cold stress increases maintenance energy requirements, but not protein, vitamin, or mineral requirements. Providing some higher quality hay may be one method to deliver more energy, but be sure to account for the hay loss that comes with your feeding method. In this type of weather, anything that falls outside a hay feeder is quickly stomped in the mud. In some situations, a high fiber-based supplement, such as distiller's grains or soybean hulls, may be a good way to add additional energy to the diet. If you have fall calving cows and the only relatively dry place for calves is next to a hay feeder, the risk of calves getting stepped on by cows greatly increases. A bedded area that only the calves can reach would be of great benefit. Newly weaned calves or thin, older, sick animals may also benefit from some type of bedding to give them a dry place to lie down and rest. Hopefully we'll have some period with no rain coming up soon to allow animals to dry off. Even so, the forecast looks like the cool, wet weather will continue, so plan accordingly to help animals deal with this increased stress. Bedding and additional energy in the diet will help alleviate some weather stress. Test and don't guess about the amount of energy you're providing in your forages. This has been Sandy Johnson, Extension Beef Specialist for K-State Research and Extension, located at the Northwest Research and Extension Center in Colby.
Thanks, Sandy, for that timely input for cow-calf producers out there. And another reminder for you hog producers that K-State has squared away the details for its 2018 Swine Day here on the campus. The date is Thursday, November the 15th at the K-State Alumni Center on the south end of the campus. During the morning session, K-State faculty will give their updates, as they usually do, on the latest research impacting you producers, looking into their latest findings on swine nutrition, management, feed processing, feed safety. The afternoon program will feature David Hogg and Sarah McReynolds from the Kansas Department of Agriculture discussing the benefits of implementing secure pork supply for producers. And the director of the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory at Iowa State University, Roger Main, will cover emerging diseases and how diagnostic labs are adapting to help you producers. The day will wrap up with a reception at 3:30 that afternoon. Registration is $25 per person if you get that taken care of by November the 7th, $50 after that date or at the door. By the way, students may attend free of charge if they register by November the 7th. All of the registration details are available online at ksuswine.org, ksuswine.org, or you can call K-State's Lois Schreiner, 785-532-1267. That, again, is the 2018 Swine Day here at Kansas State University, Thursday, November the 15th. This is Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
If you know who said the words or wrote them down, the person behind it comes to life.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
We often think of people through photos. We used to have photo albums. Now, people load their photos on their cell phones and just scroll to see or show them. And I'm sure it's the same for you. Maybe you have your refrigerator door sagging because of the photo stuck to it with magnets. Sounds familiar? I know. But those are pictures, photos. Maybe there's a small special poem stuck somewhere in between. The poem describes an emotion or feeling. It is the power of words. But while the power of words can express or evoke emotions, it also can work as a mental picture. If you know who said the words or wrote them down, the person behind it comes to life. That is exactly what happened to me the other day when I was pulling a book from my shelves to look up some information. Opening the book, Lord of Beasts, the Saga of Buffalo Jones, by Easton and Brown, several yellow newspaper clippings fell out. Fluttering down was an old clipping of the Manhattan Mercury, which ends with, "Welcome back, Paul." Of course, that is Paul DeWeese of then KSAC. I clearly remember Paul going on a journey to see and follow our Kansas wheat by combine, truck, train, ship to its final destination. He would write stories along the way of his travels and encounters, both east and west. When he got to Rotterdam, the Netherlands, the big harbor, he made a side trip to my parents' home, the Polhoeve, near Barchem. After the bus dropped him off, he walked in, waving to the farmers who were working in the fields. He saw what I knew as my countryside, my landscape, where I grew up. Sadly, by then my mother was already in the grips of cancer, but I know she enjoyed meeting him, but was perturbed she could not do more. I know Paul understood, as he wrote me after the visit. It was all long ago, both my parents and Paul long deceased. Of course, only the elder people who listen will remember him from the agriculture programs he aired on this station. I'm going to read the clip from the paper which tells the story as told by Paul when he was in Bangkok. I give all credit to the editor of the Manhattan Mercury, and I thank him for giving me these words, the picture of the man with whom I started this radio program 40-plus years ago. Beware Chinese chefs, which start out with the admonition, eating out in Asia can be unforgettable, and then Paul continues. I ate dinner in Bangkok's Chinatown, a real scorcher my stomach may never forgive. Most Asian dinners are built around rice, and that's safe enough. But look out for the pork or the chicken that goes with it. Asians know their food is highly spiced, and often they'll caution visitors against the spiciest. Not this time. The chef was too proud of his recipe and his flair for preparing the pork dish. I'd watched him fix it for another customer at the open front cafe. It looked delicious, and his routine was a good show. So I ordered the same. Elbows high, he flung thinly sliced pork into a huge bowl-shaped cooking pan over a roaring gas jet. He added a little water, a handful of red peppers, a spoonful of mixed spices, a pinch of salt, a handful of watercress, more water, and 8, count 'em, 8 sprinkles of flavoring from bottles. Almost mesmerized by the show, I was cheering him on, and he was responding like a true showman. But inevitably, the show had to end, and I would have to eat the food. One bite made me gasp. The chef saw that, and he suggested a dish of plain rice to eat with his special. That, care in eating around the peppers, and 2 glasses of cold orange juice allowed me to eat enough of the dish to be diplomatic. I congratulated the Chinese chef. He didn't understand one word, but he got the message, and he beamed. I paid and walked away rapidly. I was sucking air every step to ease the burn. My lips felt as if I'd put the wrong end of a lighted cigar in my mouth, and my tongue had to be on fire. The air helped, but a handful of bananas from a sidewalk vendor did more. I found that munched ever so slowly, bananas keep the air away and solve the bite of the peppers. 6 of them did the trick. I ate them as I walked home to the hotel. Went straight to my room for a few anti-acid tablets and waited to die, wondering what a Buddhist funeral is like. From now on, it's rice and chicken plain, no curry, no red peppers, green peppers, or exotic flavors from big brown bottles. And if I ever again watch a wild Chinese chef do a thing, it'll be on a full stomach. Reading this again, I saw the man Paul. And now I wonder, as I see Paul tasting and eating this very hot dish, he would have been the best ambassador to overcome the present trade war. Export of beans and grain to China.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University. That's our time for today. As always, thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.